Hey everyone, it's Joanna here from Inspired by Stamping, and today we're going to make this beautiful Distress ink and marker watercolor tutorial, and this card is just so cute and I just couldn't wait to share it with you today. We're going to be using our love sentiments. I'm going to be using the leaves from this set, but it's just a great set all around, and also the flowers from Just For You and the sentiments from the Big Thanks stamp set. It's just a great set actually as well. I've also cut out the paper already, so I'm all ready to go. I'm using some Arches hot pressed watercolor paper and some craft paper, and I've already cut out the card base. I'm not going to be using this distressed ink there. I actually switched it out, and I'll make sure that I put that on my blog with a list of supplies. We're going to use the number 1 round brush. It's a Winsor & Newton. And these plates I just purchased from Amazon.com, and I'm so excited about these that I just had to share. You get a set of 4. They're nice and flat so the water doesn't move around and leach into the other colors that you're using. And I just love them. They're nice and flat, perfect, small, petite. They're little dessert plates. And they are just so much fun, and I wanted to really share with you. So I'll have a link also for that. Here are all the markers that I'm going to be using today. I will also have a list of exactly which ones that I'm using, so don't worry, this is going kind of quickly today because it is a pretty long video, about 15 minutes. So I grabbed some scrap paper here, and I'm just using some peeled paint. And what we want to do is we want to stamp off first before we stamp on our cardstock. And this is because this is going to be the lightest color for our watercolor base. So we want this to be nice and light here. So I'm just kind of randomly making some vines here, nothing too specific. So what I'm going to do is grab my watercolor, my water here, and I'm just using a canning jar. It's really nice and small. I love it because I can just screw the top back on and take it with me. If I go to the park with my kids or something, I can still have the ability to watercolor. So what we're doing here is putting down our base water, and this just kind of gets that watercolor paper kind of setting the stage for adding lots and lots of layers. Plus, when you stamp for the first time, it's kind of like bumpy, I would kind of say, and so what we're doing is spreading that ink out and making it very nice and even. When you're working with ink like this, it has a tendency to set after time, so we really want to do this while the ink is pretty relatively wet. It hasn't really set in, so once it sets in, it makes it a lot difficult to move it around. So now we're going to go with some shaded lilac, and we're just going to do the same technique. Switch it around here, stamp off first, and then we'll put our stamps. And again, this is going to be our lightest color here. So when we're doing our blending, we typically won't put any color on the lightest area here. So here I am again, just getting the ink moved around for our very first layer here so we can get ready to build lots of nice layers of distressed ink and our markers on here. So we're going to do this little pink. I just changed the color of this because I wanted it to go a little bit softer. So I'm using the Tattered Rose instead of the bright hot pink one. I thought, well, it's kind of Easter, spring time, so let's go with something a bit more subtle than bright and vibrant. But you can always switch around the colors. The same technique is the same. So I'm just randomly placing the flowers here. And again, I'm just going to quickly go around and wipe my brush off on a piece of paper towel, and then just gradually go in and just get that ink flowing in those petals as well. Now that we're done applying our first layer and also watercoloring them, we're going to color the leaves, and we're going to add lots and lots of layers here. So I'm going to be using this peeled paint ink pad, and I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to stamp directly on that ceramic plate. Now if you don't have an ink pad but instead has a marker, you could just scribble like that. Both ways create a beautiful effect, and you'll still get a beautiful colored leaf no matter what. So I'm just going to grab some ink here, and I'm just using that number 1 brush, and we're going to start at the top, and that is going to be your darkest color. Now I just used my watercolor right there, and I washed my brush, and what I'm doing here is there is no color on that brush, and I'm pulling that ink all the way down to the bottom, just actually grabbing a little bit from that dark color and not too much, and I'm going to pull it straight down. And here I'm going back over, so this is all wet. That little leaf is nice and wet, and I'm going to add a little bit more dark to the top. So here I'm going again, and I'm adding that nice dark color right here. And now I've just added a little bit of water and I'm just blending it down all the way down to the tip. And you can see that the darkest area is up at the top. So to create a nice dark shade, you just want to continuously apply over and over and over again up at that top. And it's a wet on wet technique, so these leaves are still wet, nice and wet. And what we're going to do is we're just going to keep working that color, making sure that that tip is nice and light. So on those tips, there's no paint or ink on my brush. It's just pure water, which I've dabbed off. And again, on this other leaf here, I'm adding that nice dark shade first. And then I'm dipping my watercolor brush in the water. And then I'm putting nothing on it, and I'm pulling that ink down to the tip. Again, you can see how I'm doing that. I'm just adding again a little bit of that dark, making it a little bit dark. The leaf is still completely wet, and now we're just adding more and more of the dark until we reach that rich dark color that we're looking for. So it's layer over layer over layer. And so what you do is when you're using a lighter color, make sure you wash that watercolor brush off, because that ink will still be nice and dark and then you'll make a mistake. So you really want to make sure that you color your water, or rinse off that watercolor brush nice and perfectly, because that will get rid of all that dark ink on your brush, and then you can work with the lightest color. I have done a few mistakes where I've accidentally gone into the lightest color with my brush when it still had a lot of ink on it. Oh, I don't recommend it. You'll have to start all over again. So make sure always that you rinse off that ink off that brush. So here I'm just, again, adding layer over layer, and then going through, rinsing off my brush, and then pulling down that ink all the way down to the tip. And you just keep going over and over again. I didn't like the way that that leaf dried, so I'm just adding a little bit more ink to it just to kind of blend it a little bit better between the two layers. So here I'm just adding again that nice dark color and rinsing off my watercolor brush and pulling that beautiful color down to the tip, making sure that there's not a whole lot of ink on my brush again. And again, just going over up at the base at the top and just adding a little bit more color. And you could just continuously add layer after layer until you reach a real nice rich color. So here I am grabbing my lilac ink pad again and just turning it around and stamping on it. And I'm just going to grab some violets and also some dusty concord, and we're just going to scribble right on that ceramic plate. And I really wanted to share with you guys how to use 3 colors with your distress ink to make a really beautiful, vibrant petal. So I've zoomed in a bit for you so you could really see here. So I'm going to start with my dusty concord, and we're going to go in the base of my petal, right down at the end here. And that's just a nice, dark, rich color. So we're just going to add it right at the base there. Now I'm going to wash my watercolor brush off, and we're going to dip it in with a violet. And I'm going to mix the 2 colors together so that they're both kind of combined. And I'm going to pull that ink out with my brush until it gets a bit lighter, and that's going to help blend with the last color, this beautiful lilac color that I'm using. And now I'm just going to go over it with that lilac, that first ink that we used, and color the entire petal with it. And it just blends so beautifully. So again, I'm using that dusty concord color to color the base of it. Now I'm just going to grab that wilted violet color, and I'm going to mix all 2 of those together and pulling it off a little bit farther out. And I'm rinsing my watercolor brush, and now I'm going to add that beautiful lilac color on all 3 of them. And you can see how beautifully it just shades together, and you have just a gradual transition. Now, if you're having a trouble with that 2 colors, you can see that kind of there's a little bit of a line there. What I want you to do is just get your brush, dip it again in that lilac, and then go over it just a little bit more, and it will pull out. The key here is to make sure you really use beautiful watercolor paper. Arches is a beautiful watercolor paper. It's my absolute favorite. Okay, so now we're going to work on our flowers. So I'm grabbing our tattered rose and our warm lipstick marker. Now, if you have ink pads, you can go right ahead and just use the ink pads, but I wanted to show you that you can achieve both looks with both a marker and also an ink pad. So I'm going through right now with the warm lipstick, and I'm just applying that darkest color at first. I'm just going around the flower base and just kind of pulling a little bit of that ink into it. So now I'm grabbing that tattered rose, and now I'm blending all 3 of my petal, all two colors on my petals. And I'm just going through and just giving it a little bit of a color, and it just automatically blends beautifully together. Now you can go back over if it's not working for you and apply a little bit of that worn lipstick again in that darker shades like I'm doing right here, and that just kind of sets the stage again. It's already wet, so it naturally blends itself. And if you're not liking the way it's looking, go back over again and just spread that color evenly. Okay, so now that everything is nice and dry, we're just going to stamp our big thinks. And so I'm just going to line this up with my mini Misty here, and we're using my Big Thanks stamp set, and we're just going to use some VersaFine. I love VersaFine, it's my favorite ink. And we're just going to push down, and we're going to stamp twice because water paper's a little bit more coarse. You don't really get a really nice first impression stamp, so we really want to make sure that we stamp that twice, and it really just makes it pop. Watch how it comes out, it just really pops. Now I'm just going to grab this S here, and we're going to line this up perfectly, making sure that it's nice and perfect, that there's no overlapping. And again, just grab that Versamark ink, and we'll do it twice. Get those stamps out of the way, and one more time. And now we're just going to grab a sentiment. So I think we're going to use For Your Kindness today, and just something a little bit different, and lining it up perfectly. I like to stamp the big sentiment first and then kind of line it up to see where the middle is and where exactly I should stamp. And we'll just stamp this one time because it really did a beautiful job. It just was perfect, and I didn't think I needed to stamp it again. And so I'm just going to wipe my hands quickly here because I got a bit of ink on my hands. And we'll get that out of the way. And then we're just going to grab our craft paper and our card base here. And I'm using a foam tape. This is how I store my foam squares. And we're just going to use a few foam squares. I actually one on each corner, and then I like to put a couple of them in the middle just to make sure that my watercolor paper is a bit heavy and it has a tendency to kind of sag in the middle if you don't. Cardstock is pretty okay, you don't need to do that, but with watercolor paper I find it needs a little bit more support. So we're just going to line that up perfectly, grab our stamp runner here, and then we just go 1, 2, and then line that up. So there you go, we have a perfect card. So here we are with 2 cards. Now if you have some extra time, you can always color the bottom, or you can leave it just perfectly. I also added a little bit of drops. You can see the drops in the center. So if you have more time, you can also do the bottom as well if you would like. It's up to you and what kind of time frame you have. But I really hope that you've enjoyed today's tutorial. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, Facebook message me, or find me on Instagram as well. I'm always here to help. Thanks so much, guys.